Hello, BookTube, and we're back for the final discussion on the final stories, last three stories of City by Clifford D. Simak. And I'm joined with Greg from another Bibliophile Reads, Grix from Grix, etc., and Scott Danielson. Not
Hello.
Grandpa Stevens this week, but Scott, yourself this week.
You bet. Gramp Stevens.
So everybody is now, well, I guess we're all finished.
We're all done. I'm all done.
Mhm.
And Yeah, so we're doing Aesop and uh, the Simple Way and Epilogue. Yeah, there's Aesop.
Oh, so much
Uh,
glare. This is a record album. Whoops. I don't
So
know how to
cool.
make it so. Oh, there, I tilted that way.
yeah, that's better. But it's kind of neat because I kind of like the way Jenkins looks because in Aesop we'll find out that he changes,
Right.
Yeah.
but he's considered ugly before that.
And it looked
Uh,
like that dog had a putting up
I
a
think,
paw with a hand. He's
yeah,
not supposed to have hands.
yeah.
Yeah, I was going, there we go.
Yeah, he's
And then
holding
there's
a paw.
in the silhouette of the moon, there's a guy with a bow and arrow.
Yeah, that's from Aesop.
Yeah, nice piece of art. It's Frank
Mhm.
Kelly Freeze.
He who did the original? Yeah, that was Frank Kelly Freeze, I think. The original cover as well of City,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and and I think it was at Lester Del Rey or in one of the reviews. They sort of said, it's a good book, but just get rid of the dust jacket. They just said it was good. They didn't like the dust jacket,
Wow.
which I think is really cool.
I
Aaron.
always love the dust jackets.
Mhm. Yeah.
So yeah. So does anybody want to go and I guess we could jump right in and talk a little bit about each story again as we did, and then we can then talk about it as a whole now and how it fits together and all the interstitial material, the editorial material, and everything as well.
Okay, so is Aesop? I can't remember the first time they mentioned the Cobblies, or is that the
Not the first time.
Not the
But,
first time, but this is the first time they appear as a character.
right?
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, well, it's basically another. It's pretty well 5,000, I think, years.
7.
Well, it's seven from the beginning, but it's another jump of 5,000 years. But Jenkins is 7,000 years old, so it's basically 7,000 years since the story started. And hi, Joseph.
Hey, Joseph.
And we've got the Webster that it's shut off Geneva, but when he did that, when he closed Geneva, his son and their friends were having their hobbies as cavemen outside the city, so they were cut off, and it took, I think it was about almost 1,000 years after that happened. Jenkins had them all rounded up and brought them back to Webster House, and now we've got a brother, almost a complete brotherhood of animals, where wolves and bears, dogs and cats living together.
Is this
Uh,
the one in which they don't even remember what killing is?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay, okay.
that's the
Yeah,
one where who did someone one of the animals does something. Is that the raccoon?
yeah, they
The
throw a stick.
raccoon.
It's always the raccoon. Yeah.
I thought
I
the
loved how
raccoon was
Webster's
also
became a noun. Sorry.
in Simple Way because the raccoon lost his robot,
yeah,
Mhm.
and then he was the one that discovered that the ants were basically infecting the robots to help them build their massive building.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, let's sort of don't get ahead of ourselves here too much, but yeah, Aesop is like they brought them all together, like the humans, but they're not. The dogs don't think of them as humans anymore. They think of them as Websters,
Right.
and Jenkins also
Yeah.
thinks like he'll sometimes call them Websters with a small W, and sometimes Websters with a big W when he's specifically talking about the family.
It's the dogs that call them the Websters with as a noun.
Yeah.
Or the whole brotherhood of man. Yeah.
Right. And Jenkins is, of course, just calling them Websters as a family.
Yeah, and it's the one of the Websters with small W, humans. He creates a bow and arrow, but he doesn't know that it's a bow and arrow. He just knows that he's created something that kind of works, and and the there's a wolf that's he's sort of befriended with Peter, who Peter is in charge of the food stations that are all around, so the animals have grain, and they're vegans at this point, basically. They're all vegan. They don't eat
Everybody's
meat.
vegan.
That's the way.
But yeah, so there was and there's the chipmunk or squirrel actually it is, yeah, who they're talking of how this bow and arrow can work. So he shoots down a robin, or he puts an arrow through a robin, and the little squirrel gets scared and runs back and says he's gonna tell Jenkins on him. And the wolf wants to say, well, I can stop him, I can just go and basically eat him, before he gets there.
Yeah.
He can't run through the trees all the way. But also,
also the wolf kind of insinuates before that scene, insinuates that he has already done it before. Maybe
yeah,
no
well,
one was looking. Yeah.
yeah, well, that's the thing, because he's talking about oh, it's just it just this new grain food, or this grain food doesn't quite taste like meat, and then the pot. Not that I really know firsthand, but my old grandfather was a Helian, and he told me about how it tasted, and then there's a bear there too that wants to scoop up fish out of the river. So it's still like it's 5,000 years after the dogs began to first talk, and they're they're not quite fully integrated in the doggish vision of society, but also Jenkins has tried to figure it out that he's tried to take away the thought of, or in the history of man. He burned books. He actually burned books, and he edited the books that were left. But then he realizes that this is going to happen. Man is going to just repeat itself, even though he's taken away all this, the words, like he's taken away the word killing and war and everything. So he.
Jenkins wonders if he's done the right thing too, right? Because they're looking at humanity as Websters now, and he's saying that's not an accurate view of what humans were, and it's because of me that they have this view.
Yeah, because he's also, again, it's like a theme that came up before, that sort of there's always like living in the past, and Jenkins is living sort of in his memories, because he sits and he's still trying to guide them. He figures he's a father confessor.
Well, he still thinks of the house as the beginning of I don't know, the beginning of doggish civilization, and that it's sacred.
Yeah, and he won't let go of the house.
And then the dogs, in extension, don't either, because and then we mentioned the Cobblies, and this is where there's other, they realize, the dogs figured out that there is no such thing as time, in the sense that you can't go back in time, can't go in the future, and like where you would go back in time or the future, it's just a parallel world that's a bit different. And then one of these has what the dogs call Cobblies, which is, they don't really explain exactly what it is. It's like a shadowy figure, but it's one of them has slipped through and is doing killings, and it's looking for sort of a new hunting ground, and so there's several killings, but the wolf dies or gets killed by one of them, and the human Peter, the Webster with the small W, he gets so angry that through his mind he just forces the Cobley to go back to its own own dimension. But in the meantime, Jenkins has celebrated his 7,000th birthday, and the dogs got the wild. They got the wild robot to build him a new body, and he didn't think he was going to use it, but because he heard that Peter had, built a bow and arrow, he's going to go and speak to Joe, the mutant, and he's kind of wonders, is Joe still alive after almost 7,000 years? And he goes to their castle, their tower, but there's no one home, and he finds a room with doorways to other planets that he figures.
These are the dimensions that the Cobleys come from, I thought.
Well, he thinks they're other planets, and they could be other dimensions as well. It's not really fully talked about,
because it just sort of ended with Jenkins walking out into one of those places, and my impression was it's a different world in it, but it's just a different dimension world. These are where the kind of the Cobleys were slipping through, because you had this open dimension, and they could
but he didn't use the doorways for this on the other thing, because when he sees the Cobley kill Lupus, the wolf, and it's through a mind sort of thought of equations and everything, it opens a doorway, and that's where it could be. The doorways are other dimensions, but they're very different, because the dogs keep saying that the dimensions are like Aaron says here, parallel Earths that are very similar to Earth. But when Jenkins opens up the door in Joe's castle or tower, it's like a desert planet. It's something very different. So that's where he thinks it's a different world. It's a different planet.
Well, like you said, it's never fully explained.
No, but there's so much in this one, though. There's so much that's happening.
The story definitely lends itself for maybe a second part, a completely different book that could be just Jenkins sort of maybe traveling in a pilgrimage through the universe or something like that.
Well, it mentioned that Jenkins was gone for a few thousand years.
Well, that's in the next story.
Yeah,
but yeah, so he realizes that the only way, because he sees an out for getting rid of the cycle that humans are on, because he doesn't want them to then take over again. He has the fear of this, that they'll take over civilization if they start working on their own again. So yeah, he takes them all to another dimension, but that's basically where Aesop ends, and he gives them all bows and arrows, or modified bows and arrows, and he just sort of says, heaven help the Cobleys, and then that's basically where that one ends. And then the simple way is another 5,000 year jump, more or less, into the future. And then we've got it starts out with Homer walking into the robot camp, or well, it doesn't quite start out with that, but Homer walks in and wants to know why the robots are building this building for the ants, because the ants now have progressed, and we saw them in census first of all, and because Joe fiddled with them, and they're building this building over their anthills, and it's going to gobble up the world. And then Jenkins finally does come back, and this is after. There's more humor in this one again as well, where you got the raccoon. I can't remember the raccoon's name for some reason.
I can't either. Just call him the raccoon.
Yeah, Roscoe is it?
Roscoe, is it?
The robot.
I can look it up real quick.
Yeah. But anyway, he sort of has gone wild. He's run off, but then his robot gets the
Rufus.
Call. Rufus,
yeah.
He gets the call to go to the anthill or the ants and build the building, like a covering for it. And basically, it's the ants have created nanobots, and that infiltrate the robots and change their programming and takes them over and has them come and build.
Nanobots that to the ants might just be bots, right? Because they are the size.
Yeah. That's fun. But then they first of all think that, or the dogs think that they were fleas because they're so small, and then they sort of carry them to their robots helpers. But we also that's where we sort of learn how Jenkins has manipulated things and got rid of because Homer speaks to Andrew, I think it is, one of the wild robots, who's almost as old as Jenkins is, and he sort of talks about how Jenkins is wise and that he has done this because and kept the dogs away from the robots as well, because the robots are just a representation of humanity, just an extension of humanity. But then they do realize, and that this is it's called The Simple Way in the book. It was originally published in 1951 as Trouble with Ants. They changed the name for Fantastic Adventures. John W. Campbell refused to take it, and the reason that he gave Simak was that I'm sort of tired with the universe or the story. So that was it. And Simak never argued. He says he never argued with editors. They didn't want it. They didn't want it. But people have then said that it went against John W. Campbell's view of science fiction, where humans should be the ones that are inheriting the universe and movers and shakers, and they're basically, in this one, the ants inherit the earth. And he didn't like that. So it took several years for it to be published. But yeah, so Jenkins sort of says he remembers that there is a simple way of dealing with ants. So he goes, because of his 5,000 years in the Cobbly world, and then able to come, he couldn't get the equations in his mind to come back, because he was able to go one way, but he couldn't come back the other way. But then he sort of learned something, and it's a little unclear here, which is kind of interesting, whether he can actually move through space as well as just his mind. I think it's just his mind, but it reminded me of something else I'll get to in a minute. So he goes and wakes up John Webster in Geneva, who has been, there for 10,000 years, basically, sleeping almost, or 6 or 7,000.
Some whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and he asks them how to do this, and it's like John Webster's a little strange. He's going, well, he just poisoned them. and that was it. And Jenkins was actually horrified to hear that, so he takes it back, and he lies again to the dogs and says no, they didn't have a way of doing anything, so but their out was to move into the Cobbly worlds, and that's what they've been working on for thousands of years, to try to figure out how to get to the other dimensions. And that's where the story actually originally ended, where and that's where I always find it funny when people say that the story is about dogs inheriting the earth. Well, in the final story, it's not the dogs, it's the ants, yeah. But then somebody else actually inherits the earth other than ants in the very final story.
I have a question for everyone. when you talk about this dog of not killing,
yeah,
and like Jenkins is horrified of killing ants. When did the Gandhi philosophy of nonviolence really start becoming well known? Is that right around this time? And is this sort of like
Simak? You're talking about in real world history or in
real world history? It's like, is that you want to modify the world by not committing violence.
I think nonviolence has been there since the very beginning of our culture. Like I cannot even think of. I think it's definitely pre-Christian. It's definitely not an aesthetic or it's not part of aestheticism or anything like that. It's definitely. I think it's literally before we even have any written record that there was already sort of like a pacifist cultures.
But it was, like you said, there was a rise of the at least in modern modern times of the rise of the theory of nonviolence. With Gandhi and King, and I know this predates King, but I don't know if it predates Gandhi. That's what I can't remember.
Yeah,
I know Tolstoy and Gandhi were. Tolstoy was another famous pacifist, although maybe not in practice, and they were they had a correspondence together. But I think definitely, maybe right before the Victorian era would be the moment that it permeated the most. But I think Christianity made it really, really sort of like accepted in a general basis. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because the real world obviously affected Simak, the war and everything,
right?
Reaction to everything, the killing. Like that could be part of it, but I think it's more his reaction and horrification, being horrified at war and killing to begin with. That is the inspiration behind it. But before we get to the final story, because that was written 30 years after, basically, or 31 years, or no, 22 years actually, or 25 years plus after the final story. But we haven't talked too much about the editorial stuff that sort of glues these stories together so well for this. That what did other people think of how Simak structured this, and instead of going the route that a lot of people did with fix-up novels, is either rewriting the stories completely and making a flowing story, and using this interstitial material.
I think that was close to being brilliant. That was just it's just like you're reading, like the idea you're reading a book, even though you're just really reading a book that was intended for the dogs to read, and you're listening to all their pontifications. Like, did humans really exist? I doubt that. This is just a story we're telling ourselves. So
now that we've read it all, those dogs weren't even on Earth anymore. Wherever they were.
Where is this book? I mean, is it in the alternate worlds or dimensions, or?
It's also a great palliative to the great pessimism of the book, because in between every story, which if you look at the stories themselves, although they are just like talking dogs, pretty much, they are very sad. Like the end of the book is a very pessimist view of the world. But because we get these editor notes that, to me, every single one of them to a degree like made me smile. It's like it just keeps I don't know, but I think it's a perfect balance between both sides. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing too is that there's so many layers to it, and there's so many sort of angles you can look at it because of that. And like I say, it's been said before in the lives where the dogs are saying, humans and war and killing are sort of contrivances to get an idea, a philosophy across, and it's made like humans are made up. But it's on that level that the duality is that Simak created the doggish editors as a contrivance to get his ideas across, and then there's the other layers as well of that Jenkins wants them to not be human, or want their own way. But in some ways, they are human, and they still have some human values because they still follow the books. And the interesting thing is too, like I don't know if it's fully thing because when Jenkins comes back in Aesop, he's in his new body, which is a really larger body than his old one. And he goes to Webster House, but then he goes to see Homer in his own place. And that doesn't seem like that's Webster House because it's a little confusing there, but it's almost as if he went to a different house. And then, but why would the dogs have a house that Jenkins could walk into? They don't need something that large. They don't need doorways that large because they make smaller robots and everything. So there's almost a thing that because they have this reverence for Webster House and for Jenkins, that they're carrying on.
Yeah, it's preserving the. It was like we preserve like the Taj Mahal or something, or it's like it's just history. You keep it.
Yeah, and they don't really quite know why, but it's something, it's something that they have to do, and right up almost to the end, and yeah, so it works on so many levels because it's also too, like I think there's a subtlety in there of Simak sort of not hatred so much, but he didn't really care too much for critics. And so I think that comes through with these doggish editors because we can sort of see, we know the story, like we know what humans are and everything like that. And it's funny to see the editors, arguing of whether this is real or this isn't real. And then you can just make that a parallel to like biblical studies or something like that, and it's how misinterpretations can be done. And that's why I say, like, there's so many there's so many levels and so many ways you could look at it, and you can't do that if he rewrote the stories as a direct narrative. And like Michael K. Vaughan had said too, and other people have said like all along that it could be the most perfect or the best fix-up novel there is, because of that, because it gives so much, so many other dimensions. Let's catch up on a few.
Well, you catch up on the comment, but I was about to say it's almost metafiction.
Yeah.
Because you're doing a fictional comment on the fiction.
Mark saying that India became independent in 1947, and that's when he was writing this interstitial material, between sort of sometime in the late 40s, early 50s, because the fix-up novel was published by Gnome Press in 1952. So Joseph, they're other dimensions, parallel worlds. And like Aaron says, parallel words. Here, Aaron was saying, I believe Lupus and Bruin, when they say they haven't eaten, for a million, if millions. Yeah, well, that's the thing.
I believe them.
Does have a wry sense of humor, and you see this in a lot of his stories. He's got a dry sense of humor as well, and it's not a situational. It's like I say, where Lupus is, it just doesn't taste right, and it's like, no, not that I really know.
Yeah, there definitely is the desire to eat them, right?
Yeah.
We talked about the fish as well, and how much he wanted a fish. Yeah.
I wanted to ask. I'm obviously going to look at the novel a bit more. I'm very interested in the ideas of the novel as well. Although this, I don't think that I can call this a novel, but it's also like doesn't feel like a short story collection. Well, it doesn't matter either way. Like the message of the book at the end, right, is that the intellect is inherently psychopathic, right? That there's no solution because insofar as you enhance the intelligence of any being, they will begin to kill, right? That killing can't be escaped. At least that's how I got the. That's why the desolation of the last chapter is so great. I don't know if you agree with me on that, but if you agree with me that that is sort of like the overall argument at the end of the book, do you agree with that? Do you think that that the intellect, the fact, like greater intelligence comes with greater brutality?
Well, I think that's one of the things that Simak was saying, because he does say in well, Jenkins sort of thinks that even though he has purged thoughts of the humans, like of killing and everything, they will still do it. They will still create weapons and kill, and it is inherent in them. But we're also only talking of, he's done this for a few thousand years, so maybe it takes a lot longer to change, and we don't really know that. But the thing is, Jankin comes back because the humans disappeared in the Cobbly world, but they didn't die. He doesn't know what happened to them. He knows that they disappeared, and he sort of like the line. This is the other thing that's really, really interesting here, is that he says, and now even those last bothersome survivors have gone, ... someplace, somewhere, ... I wish that I could know, escaped into some fantasy of the human mind, and the men on Jupiter are not even men, but something else, and Geneva is shut off, blocked off from the world. So the other humans, what did they maybe go into another parallel world? Because he says the fantasy of the mind. They didn't disappear, so there are still in the storyline potentially humans out there, because you got the humans in Geneva, and we don't know what's happened on all the other planets. Like, did everybody that lived on the other planets all go to Jupiter, or is there still some living on the other planets?
And are the humans on the other? I mean, because we don't know what they are on the other planets.
Yeah, well, like on Mars, it seems like that they didn't have to change physically to live on Mars. So what happened? And there's Martians out there still. They, in the storyline, there's nothing saying that they became extinct. And then we find in the last story there is life, intelligent life in the universe, not non-human intelligence.
Yeah, on the idea of violence, there's this quote here. This is from Aesop. It says, "Man never thought of one great animal society, never dreamed of skunk and coon and bear going down the road of life together, planning with one another, helping one another, setting aside all natural differences. But the dogs had, and the dogs had done it," right?
Yeah.
So I think he is presenting that it's a possibility to live this nonviolent thing. But then the ants change things, because they're just going to take over the whole place unless there's going to be a conflict.
But I don't see the ants as necessarily being violent.
No, but they're just taking they're taking over the
all
place.
Resources.
Right, exactly. And then is that what makes conflict the inevitable thing?
And also
what the dogs did instead was they just got out of the way, right?
Yeah. And the other thing is with the ants that Jenkins says, can you actually, or the dogs, or somebody was saying that, can you actually, they're so different, can you have any meeting point? Like, can you understand that? Because the intellect of, dogs and other animals and humans, at least there's some, level playing field there occasionally. But with an ant.
Yeah, so when you have, it's like, is conflict inevitable? Yeah, go ahead, Drix.
Something that, like the one thing or objection that I have to the book, that I feel that it overlooks, philosophically, probably because it wasn't in the conversation in the 40s and 50s, and 50s, is that is looking, at from the beginning they talk about like we modify the dogs genetically, we enhance them, enhance their intelligence. Same happened with the ants, right? Their evolution was tempered by a human hand, which means that the kind of intelligence that they acquired was also human. That's why that's in some ways is genius, because that justifies the fact that every single animal character in the movie, in the book, feels so human, right? That it's like, we have dog historians, and it looks like we're talking only about humans, except that they are on animal bodies. But the reason why the final argument doesn't work for me is because we never really got to see if other forms of intellects that might not reflect the human one would have ended up in a different result, because it was from the beginning tempered with by a human hand. So it's very anthropocentric.
I guess the only thing we see that's not touched by humans is Cobley's, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We don't know what the thing is. That Jenkins was definitely trying to get away from that. Jenkins, I mean, to use a different thing, was definitely going for that deist thing. It's like, okay, humans created the dogs. Now humans just get out of the way and let dogs become what they are. So therefore, Jenkins was trying to get away from that influence. What you're talking about, Griggs. He's saying, don't let the humans influence the dogs. Let them just be dogs.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but he didn't want humans to negatively, according to his definition, affect them, right? Because he edited all the books and all that stuff,
right,
to try to remove what he would say is the negative piece, and give them only the positive. So there was still influence going on.
Yeah, and then by extension a human influence, because he's quite human as well. But the other thing is too, like Grix, you're saying, like with the ants, like it's whether or not it's sort of a human thing, but it's their reaction to what a human did to them that they did this. And the other thing is, we don't know, did they go to the extent where humans did too, because they had no other contact with humans after the time that Joe broke the dome that was covering the anthill and stuck and kicked it. So did they go down a path of self-destruction like humans did as well? So is that possibly another thing of saying life will go, or it has the potential of going down to self-destruction, but because the dogs have other species that they're working with, like in the bears, dogs, and cats, everything, that maybe together they can work things out, but individually they're doomed. It's like you can see that a little bit in there, whether he meant it or not, but that's a possibility as well, I think.
Yeah, although for me, I don't know if I'm making this up completely, but I think I remember at the end of the book also that he kind of like looks into the structure that the ants have been building, right? And there's like traffic signs and human figures as if they were sort of some sort of deity to them. Am I making this up, or
no.
Yeah, we'll get there in a minute. Let's Joseph has. Oh, wait a minute.
That's an interesting thought just to plant before we talk about epilogue. Is, does the epilogue change the tone of the novel as a whole?
Yeah, and that's what Simak was a bit afraid of. And Joseph D says, I cannot recall if you guys mentioned this before, but was the desertion version first submitted to Campbell the same as the one that was later published, or had he made changes? It is the same one. It was the first story that was submitted. And there are no, as far as I could tell, if there's any changes, they're extremely minor, like a word here or there that doesn't change any of the meaning. The ones that had changes were the first story, City, that had additions about nuclear war, because it originally was written and published before the atom bomb was dropped. And then Huddling Place takes out a section where where Jenkins used force to stop the spaceship that came for was it Joe? No,
The Martian, Jawal.
well, for yeah, the human Earth committee sent a spaceship to pick up the Webster, the Doctor, and Jenkins used force to get rid of them. So that was taken out. Yeah, that was taken out. That was taken out. But everything else, there's extremely minor, if any, changes to the stories, other than one of them, it was sent back, but we don't have the difference. Like Campbell did send back a story and for a rewrite, but we don't know what the rewrites were. All we have is the published version in the magazine and then the book version. And then we can go to epilogue. Epilogue was written for he was prevailed upon. Well, he was asked to do a story for the John W. Campbell Memorial volume that Harry Harrison edited, and it was published in 1973. And Simak thought, well, the story that he should return to is City, but he realized that it's so different. He's a different person. His ideas are different at that time, but he wrote the story Epilogue, but he didn't think it really fit in with the storyline, and that's why he didn't. He doesn't say that's why he didn't do a doggish editor note, but I think that's the reason why, because he didn't think it really fit in, and then he finally relented.
And well, also, you could say the dogs are gone by Epilogue, so why would the dogs be doing a doggish introduction if they're not there?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, because they wouldn't know about that story.
Right. That's outside the range. That's why I would think it's not there.
Yeah. And so then we can move now into the epilogue where Jenkins, and it's an unspecified period of time. We don't know. We know it's thousands of years because Jenkins has sort of turned off his clock, and he doesn't know how long this has been. And he sits there on the porch of Webster House. He cleans it. He replaces, stones that.
Well, we think stones are wearing out.
Yeah, so that's a long time.
That's a long time.
Yeah. Which sort of contradicts a little bit about in the first story that people were moving out because they had building materials that were so easily to be done. Well, we'll just forget about that. There's a little bit of contradiction there, but maybe eventually they decided to make Webster House, el natural. But yeah, so he's sitting there and he's not alone, and like there's so many acres around that the ants have covered the earth with their building.
But not Webster House.
Yeah, just that whole area there. And the field mice did not want to go with the dogs and the other animals. Like they held on for a long time, possibly hundreds or thousands of years. And then the dogs finally decided to leave. But Jenkins wouldn't go because he wanted, again, he figures that his interactions are going to change their evolution. Because of his humanity, and so the whole area around Webster House is filled with mice. But then he's just sitting there one day on the porch, in his rocking chair. He has a rocking chair at some point as well, and the wall falls down of the ant building, and and Grips, as you say, he goes in. And he sees, he finds a dead robot, and he figures he doesn't know what happened there, but there's no
robots don't die.
Yeah, but he, there's no ants around, but on every anthill there's a monument of a foot, like from the sort of knee down, and that's Joe's foot where he kicks it, And it's like, is that like he speculates like, is that in reverence to say that they knew that that's what kicked them into an evolutionary thing, you know, that they were working up. It's hard.
That's their religion. That's
Yeah,
like we would have like the cross or something like that. That's their symbol.
yeah,
yeah.
But he doesn't know what's happened because he can actually, like, his, we didn't say before, but his that new, which is no longer new, robot body can sense thoughts and feelings of other animals, and it's like it's really high tech. But he can sort of, you know, feel and understand with the mice, but all the mice are just want to, you know, be mice. They don't care about anything else.
Yeah. While he was walking around in that, I highlighted there was a silence and a nothingness that compounded into horror. And this is a robot speaking.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Jenkins can be horrified.
And the whole style of the story is different too. It's basically there's a bit of dialogue, but it's more narration, more telling what's happened. And well, Aaron made something, I didn't even think of this, but yeah, is that rocking chair Graham Stevens rocking chair? You know, who knows? You know.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like the thing where it's the same rocking chair, but you know, Jenkins has replaced every part like 5 times. You know?
Right. I was about to say rocking chair is not going to last as long as a piece of stone. The stone's not lasting. So
at what point does the rocking chair stop being the rocking chair? Well, how many pieces can you take out?
Yeah.
It goes back to most of you probably don't know the Aaron will and other English people, Only Fools and Horses, where there's a character who is a garbage man, and he gets an award from the Queen because he's been using the same broom for like 20 some years. And he goes, yeah, it's the same broom. I've only replaced the head 10 times and the handle 4 times. It's the same broom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Equally, I wonder about Jenkins being Jenkins after so many years.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You know?
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, but his brain is still the same, but the body is different.
Reminds me of a biblical character, Methuselah. You know, the difference is that Methuselah didn't remember his whole life, so he was effectively different. But Jenkins remembers everything, doesn't he?
Yeah, well, he does, but he thought that by turning off his clock that he would forget. But that's all he's doing is living in the past. That's all he does for however long, thousands of years, you know, and you know, it's and the other thing is too, he says it all happened in one day, but because he's turned off his clock, how does he know it happened in one day? You know, the ant wall fell down, and then Andrew comes back. That was in
Aesop.
No, he wasn't in Aesop. He was in the Simple Way.
Simple Way.
Yeah, one of the wild robots, and he was the last to leave with the spaceship, and they're just passing by again, so they'd stop in to say hi, you know, to see if he's, and they sort of figured he was still going to be there. So he, like Jenkins says, it all happened on the same day, but you know, when he's got his clock turned off and everything runs together, it may not have been. It could have been 1,000 years difference, you know, and we don't know. All we know is that it is a long time. Like Jenkins is bloody ancient, you know. He is ancient, and the whole thing is too, like it is one of the themes of sort of thinking about the past and living in the past, and because there's also the thought of with the dogs, they were trying to go back in time. They were doing something to go back in time, and but they found out there was no time, which is an interesting thing because like Andrew in the Simple Way too says to Homer the dog that, you know, you guys have done things that humans with science couldn't do. like you found out the Cobbly worlds, they don't have science. And that's the other thing that's interesting is that the dogs have created something and done something without science. What did the Martians do without science? They created the Juane. Juane was able to do the philosophy.
Yeah.
And that's and so there's this other thing. Like there's so many themes. That's the thing. There's so many things that are going on in here because it's also the question of, is science possibly the doom to a race? You know, if they don't have science, it might not be. You know, there's all these kind of questions, but epilogue, yeah, it's just kind of a sad story because at the end, yeah, who inherits the earth? It's the mice.
Nice.
It's the
And
mice.
what happened to the ants? Did they just fade away?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know.
They built their massive building, go, oh, our existence is done. They escape into another dimension and build.
Yeah. Because they would have covered up or went to the towers where Joe was, and did they go to another planet? Because they would have been able to get to those doors.
Right.
Did they all go to a different planet? Or did they have their own dimension? Because the dogs talk about up until that point that they do know that there's a closed world because of ants, and there's a couple closed worlds that they can't get to. And they sort of figure that one of those is going to be their Mother Earth, where everything originated. But they don't know. But then we've got Jenkins now flying around the universe, or the galaxy, with Andrew and a couple other robots. And Andrew says there's work to do. There's work out there to do. What does he mean by that as well? Like, what work is there for the robots to do?
Yeah, Jenkins just never did a whole lot of work. He just sort of like watched and guided and
very stoic.
Yeah,
he's the philosopher of, I guess, he's the intelligent one of the robot, because Andrew talks about that the robots have to use facts, and the dogs in that aren't encumbered so much by facts. Like 2 + 2 to a dog doesn't necessarily mean 4. But to the robots, they can't go outside of their programming. And in some ways, Jenkins did. Somehow, Jenkins has gone outside of his programming, for better or for worse. See, that's the thing, because there's the whole thing of, like, he even questions himself. Did he do the right thing? And like, what a robot questioning himself.
The story ends with him wanting to cry.
Yeah.
And robots can't, what is it? Robots can't cry or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, a robot cannot weep.
Robots cannot weep.
Yeah, and it's just, it's that's where it comes back to Simak's robots are more human than human, at time, or can be, and it's to me, it's just such a great story. It's because it's got every well, there's so much in it. That's the thing, and but on the surface of it, you just think it's just a silly little tale or a bunch of short stories that are strung together. But because even that themselves has a lot to it, but because he's added this extra doggish material, that just sends it to many other levels. And every time I read it, like, I've read it now, it's got to be 30 times, and every time I read it, I see something else in it, because every time I read it, like, over the years, I change. Like, even Simak says he's a different person. So, he wouldn't write the stories, when he did Epilogue, he wouldn't have done probably the exact same things. He would have changed some stuff, and they'd be different. They'd be different stories because he was a different person. And that's where this works for me, because you do see different things through it. Because I still, my favorite story out of it really is Huddling Place, and it's always been because of the thing of where they are, they're self-sufficient, I guess, and they're away from everybody else, but content. But it's also a very sad story as well. It's like Hobbies is very sad as well. It's quite sad because it's again, that one is John Webster is thinking about the past, and the humans are thinking about the past. Jenkins is thinking about the past, but do the dogs think about the past? To a certain extent, but that doesn't seem to be their biggest thing. They don't understand what man is and everything. They're more thinking about the future, even though there's no time. You know, it's all these contradictions and everything, and you know, he leaves off stuff like what happened to the mutant, and you know, we don't know. And it's sort of, the mutants in some ways are a creation to get something to happen in the story, you know, and it's like, so let's get rid of them, you know, because if we
but then he brought in Cobblies, and they're sort of like the same thing as the mutants, just brought into the story to move it along.
Exactly, yeah. But also too, but they're more than that. They're a simple plot device, but because they're there, they actually do something even bigger, or potentially. It's maybe because he doesn't explain it, and that's what makes it so much more. What gives it more depth is because he doesn't explain it. Because if he explained it, then you go, well, I don't know about that. But then if he doesn't explain it, it's up to the reader to fill in the gaps.
Because if you explain it, you can pick it apart and say where he's wrong.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing is, we talked about before, like I said, a huddling place I like. And I think, in every story, except I don't think in the epilogue, he does not use the word huddling. I think it's the only story that doesn't have huddling or huddle in it.
Interesting.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah, I love this book very much. Yeah.
It's very good. As I said, tossing my book.
You tossed it.
It's good. I mean, I don't think it'll rank as my favorite of all time, like some people, but it's still very good. It's well worth seeking out. I mean, I presume if you're following this broadcast by now, you either have read it or are going to read it, but it's good. Really,
as of today, is my second favorite science fiction book, and the one that I enjoy the most by far. That's for sure. But I haven't read that much science fiction, and now I'm going to spend the whole summer just doing sci-fi after this, honestly.
Very good.
But yeah, no, it's like, to me, it's my favorite science fiction novel or science fiction book. But it's kind of weird because like, I like Hyperion as well, and but they're different beasts. That's the thing. There's a lot that are similar in the sense of philosophy and religion, and that type of thing that are in the stories, but like, they're both deceptively simple. but there's I think in Hyperion there's much more. Well, it's much more on structure and things like that, more details. So I would say that Hyperion is a more deeper book and more, and maybe a better science fiction book, but I still like City better, you know, because of the simplicity of it.
It's so enjoyable as well. It reads so fast. It's one of those few books. I'm very aware of how many pages I have left, but this book was like, I was trying not to finish it, and then I finished it, didn't even realize that it was there.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. Philosophical science fiction is where I'd put this one, if you had to put it in a bucket.
and the thing is, it's like, some people say, well, it's not science fiction because, you know, how can you operate on a dog and change, make them talk and then have that hereditary. But he doesn't explain what's happened. So, we now know genetics and genetic manipulation. Maybe that was the operation that was done.
Well, okay. Well, Sean, really almost 90% of science fiction would be fantasy because it's not real science that's in there. So, like Star Trek is not real science. I'm sorry.
And it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be.
Right.
As long as but it's not supernatural. It's not magic. And that's the difference, I think, for me, is that one is magic, and then the other at least pretends to be scientific, like it's using the scientific method.
Right.
Yeah, and an operation, that's science.
It is.
Yeah, I think I understand the argument that many people make of like fantasy and science fiction being the same thing. To me, whether or not they might be the same thing insofar as they're both like sort of like coherent worlds that could not happen in reality, they just feel different. And for science fiction, it's always looking forward as well, and fantasy tends to be looking back, right? Fantasy almost always is some like medieval kind of world. Sci-fi is almost always ahead of our time. So that's the differentiation that I normally get from that.
Yeah, and then we get to the book that we were reading, Scott, the Tales of the Dying Earth by Jack Vance.
Right.
It's set way in the future, but it's actually yes. But it's actually
I want to read that book.
Evil.
It's so far in the future that they've lost all technology and everything.
Cloud Atlas too is like that.
Well, that's the same as Gene Book of the New Sun, which people say fantasy. We say no, read the book. Fantasy.
But it did win the International Fantasy Award. City did, but that was before there were Hugos and Nebulas. I think. I don't think either of them.
They were lumping it all in one thing. Yeah.
So yeah. And I'm going to continue reading Simak every month. And
so, what's your next one? Yeah.
Is Enchanted Pilgrimage.
Cool.
One of his fantasy. It is a fantasy story.
Okay.
And it's basically I did this one because reading the Tales of Dying Earth. The other thing that I was going to say that like I say, Hyperion that I like, and then Jenkins says that every being, even the robots, have the ability, and it's unclear whether he actually physically went to Geneva to wake up John Stevens. I don't think he did. I think he did this in his mind. He was able to connect
with the sleeping body.
Yeah. But the thing is, it did remind me of Hyperion Cantos, the last volume, The Rise of Endymion, where they're able to do things like that and actually physically move. I don't know if there's any connection there, but I thought that was when I was rereading this again this time. And again, like I say, I keep seeing new things all the time, and that popped into my mind that it was something that was.
Well, I'm going to make a bet that Dan Simmons had read City before reading Hyperion. Just an idea.
Very probable. Yeah.
Well, somebody in the comments, I can't remember who it was now, but asked about, did Simak read Sirius by Olaf Stapleton? Is it Sirius? Yeah, with the dog, intelligent dog, and that might have been one of the first ones. But it's like he probably did, but it's like there's nothing to say. Or he never said that these are the things that inspired me. So and the dog is different. The different stories and everything as well.
Okay.
But the thing is, it is groundbreaking because that's the thing is like, because when you read stuff now, people say, oh, well, that's been done before. Well, sometimes that is the first, and the thing is, up till this time, there isn't that much science fiction until he wrote it that did show that humans are a dead end species. Like Scott, you were saying before of like make a list. It'd be interesting to go through books that sort of get rid of humans.
Yeah.
Would you count Time Machine as a book that got rid of humans?
Maybe.
And yeah, and you know,
well, actually, definitely yes.
Yeah,
no, especially the very last chapters, but the bulk of the book, you have to say, are they humans at that point?
Yeah, and well, the thing is that that for sure he did like H.G. Wells, so he had read The Time Machine clearly, and all of Jules Verne and all that stuff, and he started reading, you know, amazing stories near the beginning, probably in 26 or 27. So he was reading science fiction right from the beginning. So
nice.
so he was well versed in this stuff, and it's definitely not pulp. It's not pulp fiction. It's not pulp, and that's the one thing that he says that he became a mature writer with these stories. You know, his maturity. Everything he sort of thinks anything before these stories, he was floundering in some ways, and it was also the help of John W. Campbell that created that, and that's what Campbell wanted to do was pull science fiction out of the pure pulp.
Is this the same Campbell that wrote The Hero of a Thousand Faces?
Sorry?
Is this the same Campbell that wrote The Hero of a Thousand Faces?
No, that's Joseph Campbell.
Joseph Campbell.
All right. Okay.
This is the Campbell that wrote Who Goes There?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So my list. I have a massive sci-fi TBR now as well for the next coming months.
Nice.
But yeah, so and you know, despite his deconstruction, John W. Campbell's deconstruction and thing, you know, and cancellation, sort of, in retrospect, you wouldn't have science fiction the way it is today without him, probably. You know, it would be different, but it may have taken a long time or longer time to pull out of the pulp. And it's not to say that the pulp. I love the pulp stuff, even the stuff that was still going on at his time. But I don't see this as pulp science fiction. It's not the sensational stuff. It's there's much more depth to it. And yeah, and it's really weird where I read stuff like I've been trying to collect like all the reviews of it, and I should have had it to hand here to read, because there was one reviewer in a newspaper, I think in the UK here, says, "Oh, it's a good story, but you know, he's no H.G. Wells, and if he would have taken more time with the stories and writing, he could have got to that level, but he probably wanted a Frigidaire or a swimming pool or something like that. He needed some quick money." And then you get somebody in Brisbane at the same time doing a review saying that he's the new H.G. Wells. You know, so you get the polar opposites of this, and I still see that, because occasionally I do see booktubers, you know, making videos of this, and they tear it apart, or they try to, saying that, oh, it doesn't, you know, people didn't leave the city, so it doesn't work and stuff like this. And I'm going, why are you fixating on what happened or didn't happen in science fiction? You know, just because, you know, we now know that you know, you can't, you know, humans can't just walk on the surface of Venus, you know, now doesn't mean that, you know, it's crap. The other stuff is completely wrong, or it's wrong scientifically, but that wasn't the point of it.
No, we mentioned that it's all science fiction science is dubious.
Yeah.
Usually.
But that is one of the stupidest arguments that I've ever heard. Like, because why would you be writing in the first place if you were only to be based yourself on reality? Because by that same logic, the best story would be one that describes reality with no added creative input. Like, I don't know, it would be a documentary. It would be just like, okay, and they took the elevator and went to the third floor, and then they went back to work.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like I was going to say philosophy, but science fiction, and like a lot of things like that is to try to get sometimes ideas that aren't palatable to some people, to get them to think about it, because you're in a different situation. It's I always go back to Rod Serling, when he got in trouble for writing stories that were about about racism and stuff like that. And he wrote a TV teleplay about the prejudice against Mexicans, and he got flack about this, because he was too controversial and he shouldn't be writing stuff like this. So then he started Twilight Zone, and you can find this interview, and he's asked, "Are you going to be controversial?" "Oh, no. This is all just going to be about aliens and stuff like this." Yeah, right. He's using that to get these other ideas across, and that's the beauty of science fiction.
Yeah, that's what science fiction's good at.
Discriminate against an alien, and people are, at least not everyone will recognize. Oh, wait a second, we do that to the Mexicans as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think that's what science fiction does really well. Is it lets us look at humanity from outside of humanity.
Yeah,
whether it be a robot or an alien or who knows what.
Many science fiction book covers look like westerns, actually.
Yeah.
Well, that's the one thing people are they in early time, for TV and radio, they got people who wrote westerns to say, "Oh, now we're going to try something science fiction. You wrote a western, you write science fiction," because it's the same thing. But it isn't really, but there are similarities. But we can go right back to Star Trek using Sledgehammer to get the idea of racism across, where you've got Leo Garcia or whatever what is his name? Joker from Batman, where he's white on one side, black on the other side, and then he's got his nemesis who's black on the other side and white on the other side. They hate each other because of the way they look. It's like that wasn't even subtle, but it's supposed, it's the kind of thing where it makes that you're getting the point across, but people will accept it. But if you actually have a black person or a Latino person and a white person, and you do the same thing, some people just won't accept that.
You're right.
And it may not get aired. It's not so much that people won't accept it, but a lot of times the producers and publishers, they didn't understand this. Like the people that made Twilight Zone didn't understand what he was doing. So he was able to slip stuff through. And that's the other beauty of science fiction, because you're able to talk about things that are taboo usually. Like science fiction talked about a lot of stuff, like Astounding wrote or published a lot of stories to do with atomic power and things like this, where it was basically illegal. Like it would, they were investigating a little bit, but they were able to get a lot of stuff out there that was very truthful about atomic power and nuclear bombs. And but if you wrote a paper about this, you've been locked up, as selling secrets,
Yeah.
Because there are stories where where Russians actually were reading science fiction, to try to learn stuff about, nuclear power and atomic power. So you're able to. It can be very subversive, and that's the one thing. It can be subversive. But anyway, yeah, I'm glad everybody liked it.
I'm glad you did this, Sean.
Absolutely, yeah. This was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed being on.
I don't think I have time to do the next Simak book, because I'm doing Les Miserables and some other stuff next month. So
yeah,
well, I'm definitely in for the next one too.
Yeah, and then May is going to be Way Station. If you haven't read Way Station,
I have Way Station on my Kindle, so maybe I'm doing with Les Miserables. I might pick that up.
That's another big one is, and like City is sort of like Webster House is basically his home, in southwestern Wisconsin, but Way Station is much more centered around that area and the topography in that, even though it's sort of it's condensed, but you really get a sense of where he grew up from that.
Cool.
So yeah. So I don't know if anybody else. We still have a few people watching here. Any other questions for this? But as I say, next April, if anybody, I'm not going to do this in the same way. I'm not going to do this in the exact same way as City, because this is sort of an add-on. The ones in between, I was going to do every 2 months, so the ones in between are going to be add-ons. And I know for sure that this is April. June is going to be a Choice of Gods. I should have actually probably did Choice of Gods now, because the humans get to, disappear from Choice of Gods as well, or a big chunk of them, and the robots as well. Teresa saying this was fascinating. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
And Joseph for doing this discussion. Yeah, it's been
Hey,
fun.
Randy.
As I said, I read it so many times, but I keep seeing different things, and it's nice to hear other people coming in and viewing this. And Randy's here.
Cool. Aaron's going to read Enchanted Pilgrimage too.
And Aaron says he'll be reading Enchanted Pilgrimage in April. So it also fits with Enchanted April as well. That's a good book, but it has nothing to do with it.
Cool.
Randy, you are a bit late.
A little late.
We're just finishing up here.
Right.
But yeah, it's been fun doing this, and I'm really glad that it's been quiet in our Voxer group, but there could be. That's the other thing is I did this on a structured basis, and that's what I'm going to throw out to people, so even people watching this later can put in comments. The other books that I'm going to do, Way Station in May, July is All Flesh is Grass, and Project Pope in September, and then November is the Werewolf Principle. Those are the main ones that are going to be interspersed.
I am definitely going to follow up on one of them. I don't know which one yet, but as I said, this book has become a little bit my gateway drug into probably my new favorite genre. Who knows?
Nice.
Cool.
And well, my question is it better to split it up over the month, or like it worked, I think, or potentially worked with City short stories, but with the novels, just do it at your pace and discuss it at the end of the month.
I have found when I try novels, breaking it up, I lose connectivity. I lost a little connectivity reading this broken up, because you stop for a couple of days and pick it up, and you lose that train of connection. So, yeah, at least for me, I mean, I'm gonna do it Les Miserables, and we'll see how well that works. But for me, I lose connections just breaking it up.
Also, sometimes you read like half of the book in one day, and then the other half in like 2 weeks. It's nice to have more freedom when it comes to the approach.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna be gone from book for a few months, so I don't know when I will be joining, but I'll definitely join for one of the other Simak books.
Excellent.
Okay.
I'll do another video. Like I say, I know those every 2 months are the ones that we're doing or that I want to do, and then I know for April and June are going to be the Enchanted Pilgrimage and then Choice of Gods. The ones in between are up in the air yet, so I haven't decided, but I will do a video outlining everything again very soon.
Okay.
Very good. Very good.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, everyone.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.
All right.